There we go.
Up and running.
I figured it out.
I'm of that generation. Every time I get a new piece of technology or equipment, I'm looking to see where the 10p goes to make it work. So
How does this work? I know. How are you?
I'm very good. Thank you for asking. How are you this evening?
I'm all right. I've got a bit of a cold, so I've got a lot of tea. That'll get me through.
Okay, it's good to
Tea
know.
solves everything.
And I would like to say before we start, I'm looking forward to this evening's chat. I'm looking forward to maybe chatting, interacting with your audience as well. I know some people that watch me, I've let them know that I'm going to be on your channel, so hopefully they'll come across and just ask questions as well, and we'll take it from there. But I do appreciate being on your channel because again, technology takes me a while to figure it out before I could do something like this.
Oh, it's easy once you figure it out.
So is everything once you figure it out.
So I have questions for us.
Okay.
So we can just get started. Let me have a look. Let me see if I can find them. I have some questions. Now I won't be able to find them. There's some good ones. What are your views on ADHD and its effect on healing from traumatic experiences?
Be honest, I don't know a lot about ADHD. I know it exists. I know what it is, and I know some people who have it. I haven't really looked into it a lot. Haven't really worked with a lot of people. As regards to healing, I suppose the first question I'm going to defer to you, because I would be interested in actually learning even from that question how that might hinder from healing, because I know that a lot of different things can hinder us. There's a lot of things could be going on with us, not necessarily just ADHD. So,
you know what I think? I think
mm-hmm.
that is one. I have a colleague who I think would be very good to talk to about that.
Okay.
That might be one for another evening because it's not. I know a bit about it, but it's not my big area of expertise.
Sorry, I was just
I can be a little from experience is that sometimes I think some people with ADHD often have quite low self-esteem because they've grown up with lots of you're annoying, you're challenging, you're difficult. So these kind of really negative messages, I think, can make you more vulnerable to tolerating someone's nasty behavior.
I think as well, I mean, prior to it being given a name, of being recognized, I mean, I'm thinking of my generation growing up, because I remember, and I would include myself in this, there was always the kids in the class that were told to just sit still, to pay attention, stop messing about. There was no real understanding of it. So, and I think that there's a recognition of it. It can be treated. People, can be helped. It can be encouraged. Things can be adjusted to make things easier. And I know there has been some talk. Sometimes you see it on Twitter and things like that. They talk about the number of adults who are now being diagnosed with it, as if that's a bad thing. Well, I don't think so, because I think some of those adults were maybe those kids I'm talking about.
Yes.
And sometimes I would even include myself, because I've noticed this when I do live streams myself. I start out with the topic and I have bullet points, and my mind just goes off in so many different directions. I go down a rabbit trail, and by the end of it, I'm sometimes trying to pull it all back together again to see if I can make it make sense. So ADHD, I think it's like everything else. It's like a spectrum. We can all have traits, we can all have characteristics, up to the point where maybe someone can get a diagnosis of it. My understanding of it is the difficulty with holding attention. The way I describe my mind works, not saying I have ADHD, but I do know my mind jumps all over the place. The difficulty with healing is sometimes we need to pay attention to things. And I say this many times in my live streams. If we're not paying attention to little, small, subtle changes, if we're not paying attention to the things that are in our best interest. And I think with ADHD, and this would be common with not just ADHD, when our mind is going all over the place and we're focusing on pain, or we're focusing on the most expedient thing, I think that can have an impact on our healing, as opposed to thinking of the long-term gain that we have to make towards. Not being an expert on ADHD, that would really just be my my speculation on it.
Yeah. I don't think there's anything that would suggest someone with ADHD would have more difficulties with necessarily healing than others.
And like all things, I would say it maybe comes down to the individual as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But that's actually an interesting question, and I'm actually going to make a note of that, because maybe ADHD. And I know I did a video a long time ago on it, and I think that's something I might want to look more into. Actually.
Do you have another question? That worked. Can you see it on the screen?
I can actually. Yeah, an irrelevant question. Psychic consultant, that sounds familiar. I think that's one of the people that watches my live streams. Yeah, it is. Yeah. Favorite author, I wouldn't have so much a favorite author. I would have favorite stories. I mean, different authors. And I grew up, I loved adventure, I love science fiction and so on. So some of my favorite stories would be one I actually mentioned in a live stream once, The Count of Monte Cristo. I love The Count of Monte Cristo. It works on so many levels. There's these old books, and you get such good insight into the human condition. Moby Dick as well. That's another one. The nearest I would have to a favorite author, I would say, would probably be H.G. Wells. Again, it's the sci-fi nerd in me. And the reason I would say him is because at the age of 10, I don't know what I was thinking, but at the age of 10, I thought it'd be a really good idea to read The War of the Worlds. And it terrified me. I'm going to be honest.
A big book for a 10-year-old.
I just loved sci-fi. I loved adventure and things like that. And I think as well, at the time, it was very big. Jeff Wayne had his musical version of it as well. So there was maybe something in that. It terrified me, but it fascinated me. And it's a book that I would keep going back to. Every couple of years, I would just read it again. I always get something new from it. But I do like H.G. Wells stories. The Invisible Man, The Time Machine would be another of my favorites. The Time Machine. I love The Time Machine. That would be the nearest I would get to a favorite author, but it's more favorite stories that I have. So hope that answers the question.
Yeah. I don't think I have a favorite author either. I have, and I don't. I don't really read a lot of fiction. I probably should.
Well, the reason I like fiction is because I think it's like I say, books like The Count of Monte Cristo, Moby Dick, Three Musketeers. We learn through stories.
Yeah.
Even as children, you think of nursery rhymes, fairy stories. We learn through stories. That's we learn things like our moral compass. We learn things like sacrifice for the greater good. We learn things like responsibility. So I suppose a lot of the books I read would be fiction, but they would have been, I suppose, where I would have learned a lot of things from. I still do.
I have some classics. I like the Harry Potter series. Love those.
I am probably the only person on the planet who has never read a Harry Potter book or seen a Harry Potter movie.
No.
Never. And which is strange, because when you think of I like Star Wars, I like fantasy world and science fiction. I've never.
Should be up your street.
Yeah, it probably would be, but.
And I love I like some really old ones like The Crucible.
Oh yeah, that's
a play, but
yeah.
I love, and the Scarlet Letter is another one. So there's a theme there. I'm sure there's a theme.
Well, there's something psychodynamic going on with both of us, maybe.
Yeah. So, how about another question? If you want the other question,
Sure.
And this is a good question, I think. How do you set up healthy boundaries without being labeled controlling?
My first reaction to that would be, why is it important why you're labeled?
That's a good question.
Because if you think of the people who cross boundaries, how do they do it in the first place?
Mm-hmm.
By leading you to believe your boundaries are selfish in the first place. There's something wrong with your boundaries. You're a bad person. You're mean. You're horrible. You don't care. So when you start to set up boundaries, chances are you are going to be labeled anyway. So it's not a question about not being labeled. The question is maybe think of the boundaries in the first place. They're probably going to label you anyway. But with good, healthy boundaries, it's how you manage that.
I think the question is, what are healthy boundaries? Because I have seen sometimes as well a bit of an overreach. So people go from I have no boundaries to I am not taking any bull crap from anyone ever again, and it's a little bit overdone.
Yeah, it's like everything else. There's nuance. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a bit of nuance, and I think the helpful thing to think about boundaries is not about telling other people what to do. It's about deciding what you need to do to look after yourself.
Yeah.
So, and boundaries can have a degree of flexibility in them.
They need to be flexible. Yeah.
And like there's a relational element to it. You know.
I tend to think of boundaries, and this sounds like I'm oversimplifying it, but I tend to think of boundaries in different ways. But the first way would be what's mine and what's yours. Okay. The way I illustrate boundaries is you think of your values, you think of your limits, your capacity, you think of your self-respect, your integrity. You're also aware of the other person's.
Exactly.
And the way I illustrate boundaries to people is if you think of your house. Now, if you left your house, the windows and doors open, people are going to do what they want. You come home from work, your house is empty. You might come home from work one day and you find strangers sitting in your living room watching your television, eating your biscuits. People are going to take advantage if you leave your windows and doors open all the time. But if you, just as you said a moment ago, if you lock those windows and doors all the time, no one's ever going to get in. Then you're never going to get out. So if you think of your boundaries, this is again about them being flexible. They're going to be different in different relationships. They're going to be different in different situations. You think of it like your house. It is entirely up to you when you open the door and when you don't. Who you let in and who you don't.
And when?
Yeah. Who you keep on the doorstep and who you invite in. You know.
Absolutely.
You have control. And when you think of it like that, again, we can be flexible. There are some people we're going to allow in, some people we're not.
There are sometimes you bolt the door shut.
Yeah. Sometimes we're just going to say, go away, I'm not home. You know, whatever. Yeah. So boundaries, if they are far too rigid, you're right. The way I look at it, no one gets in, but then you don't get out. Sometimes when you think of the people who talk about having very strong boundaries, again, not necessarily. All they're really doing is it's almost like they're dictating to you what boundaries should be. Their boundaries are important, but yours aren't. I mean, so there needs to be context, nuance, and all the rest of it.
Well, there needs to be, I'll say this really carefully, in a good enough relationship, there needs to be flexibility and collaboration around boundaries, right?
Yeah.
You know, if you're negotiating with someone you live with about how the household chores are done, what is and isn't okay, what you need to, you know, if you have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning for work, when do you need your partner to be quiet?
Absolutely.
You know, that's a sort of mutual respect. Versus if someone is very abusive or controlling, the boundary might be that's not okay with me and you don't get to come in.
Yeah. I think when it comes to relationships, a lot of people talk about things like communication, mutual respect, and so on. Do you know what I think? What makes a relationship work? What makes a really good relationship work? Doesn't matter who it's with, your partner, people you work with, your next door neighbor. It's the art of negotiation.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's the art of negotiation. You negotiate your boundaries. You negotiate what's important, what you can be flexible over. Even talking about things like privacy. Two people, you know, as close as they are, they still need their privacy.
Absolutely.
So it's again, again, it's one of those questions. It's never a one size fits all answer. It's very, very nuanced. There's a lot going on with it. But I think a good indicator of a boundary, or maybe not having strong enough boundaries or being too rigid, is, again, paying attention to yourself. It might feel okay in the sense that it feels safe, but it's not necessarily helping you. It could actually be keeping away people who are there for your best interest.
Yeah. If you're too rigid, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Never been a big fan of the, if it feels good, it must be good. And if it feels bad, mention that it must be bad.
No.
Yeah. Feelings are honest, yes, but they're not always an accurate reflection of reality.
I would say look at the effects.
You pay attention to what's going on and you try to be honest with yourself. If it doesn't sit right, it doesn't sit right for a reason. And you're honest with yourself what that reason is. And then it's how you assert the boundary. And if you start doing that, yes, you are probably going to get called selfish. In which case I say, and I'm going to be very careful how I say this, go ahead and be selfish.
Oh, yeah.
Go. You're always going to be someone's villain. Be the villain.
There are some people for whom if you do not do what they want you to do, then you are the villain.
Yeah, you're the bad guy.
Yeah.
I would say go ahead and be the bad guy. I was talking about stories a moment ago. I mentioned the Count of Monte Cristo. There's a wonderful line in that. Just before young Edmund escapes and his friend, the priest, the Abbé Fry, he dies. But before he dies, he gives him the map to the treasure and he says, off you go. But before he tells him about the treasure and off he goes, he says to him, when you get out, do not commit the crime for which you now serve the sentence.
Mm-hmm.
You're always going to be the villain. Just do not be the villain that they tell you you are.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be what they paint you to be.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's good advice. Reminds me of Esther Prynne from The Scarlet Letter. Because she's very dignified.
Yeah. I think you'd be more familiar with that than I would. I'm much more kind of...
She was made to wear a scarlet A because she'd had a baby out of wedlock.
Ah, right.
And that was her shaming. And she was very dignified and very caring and a very good mother. And she did not fulfill her... she was not the sinner she was painted to be.
Yeah.
And those who painted her to be a sinner were certainly not innocent. Okay.
You usually find they never are.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a silly example, but the one I always use is for every billionaire megalomaniac trying to take over the world, James Bond is the bad guy.
Mm-hmm.
So be the bad guy. Just don't be the bad guy that they say you are.
Yeah. There's a question in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know anyone called Denise. So I don't think I'm related. There we go. I had a child diagnosed with ADHD in the 90s. I've learned about NPD. I think that some of the kids who are diagnosed have parents with totally different parenting styles. What do you two think?
Let me read to think about the question. Some of the kids who are diagnosed have parents with totally different parenting styles. I would say, again, it would come down to the individual, but I say that could well be feasible. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think as well with hearing about NPD, it's got a genetic component to it. So you probably have some genetic influences. And so you may well have one narcissistic parent. And then you may well have another parent who is off the kind of personality type who ends up in a relationship with a very narcissistic person. Maybe more self-sacrificing. But you may well find there's different parenting styles there. That would make a lot of sense. But I don't think you can make like a hard and fast rule, like this is what a family looks like if someone has it's not that simple.
I think as well it is possible that you can have two different parenting styles, but the parents are still in agreement in how to raise kids, because sometimes the parents may have different rules. I think of when my kids were very small. Mum was who you went to when you needed help with homework, when you cut your knee, when you needed a hug. Dad was a climbing frame that you just climbed all over and you got entertained. I was the entertainment, really. Um, we had different parenting styles because, again, we're different personalities, different people, but we could meet in the middle. And it's always, working with what's in the best interest of the children. We might have had different approaches. Sometimes sometimes we couldn't. So you can have different parenting styles, but it's not necessarily it's going to lead something.
You can have very different personalities, but your child's going to have a different relationship with each parent.
Yeah, it's true.
What matters is that the parents are not undermining each other.
Yeah.
That you're a team, that you might be of very different styles, you may even have different approaches, but you collaborate.
I think collaborate's collaborate's the good word. It's that's the operative word for this evening when it comes to relationships. Collaborate. Word I used earlier was negotiate. The power, the ability to negotiate, to collaborate is probably a good word.
Who I love on negotiation? This will make you laugh. He's brilliant. He's a former FBI hostage negotiator.
Oh, right.
It's called Chris Voss. There's loads of them. You Google him or put his name into YouTube, you'll find him. I'll tell you what, his strategies for difficult negotiations are exactly what Wendy Bear uses with people with narcissistic personality disorder. He is so good. But it's like a good negotiation should be win-win.
Yeah, it's something I say when I'm working with couples. Whenever couples come to see me, more often than not, many different reasons people come, but more often than not, it usually comes down to the communication. They're not communicating. They've either shut down completely or they're shouting at each other or whatever. And I just want to say about that part of negotiation. People go into arguments. I think it's hardwired into us. We go into arguments thinking about winning.
Mm-hmm.
Who gets the last word? Who puts the other one in their place? Who gets their own way? And the thing is, that works, but that works in the short term. That works in that moment. Because even if this is a thing, and it's something that I think we all learn a bit too late in life, getting the last word doesn't mean you're right. It just means you want the other person to shut up. That's all it means.
And it doesn't mean it's permanent.
Absolutely. Which is a lot of the times whenever people are having arguments, that's why sometimes the last argument gets dragged up and the one before that, because things weren't resolved.
And the one that started 10 years ago that you're still having today.
Yeah. And what about the time this? When it becomes a win-win, it becomes a very different discussion. People are still disagreeing. They can see different sides of things and so on, and they might even want a different outcome. But whenever it becomes a win-win, it's more about it's healing, not harming. It's fixing, not blaming. Mm-hmm. It's problem solving, not fault finding. That process might take a bit longer, but it's worth it.
It becomes two people working together on a problem.
Yeah.
To solve a problem. Then they may come from different perspectives, but they're both trying to solve the problem, as opposed to two people trying to fight each other.
Yeah. Again, who gets the last word? Which does not mean you've won. Something I try to do, even when if I'm in an argument with anybody, even if someone's being quite vitriolic and they're being insulting and so on, which does happen from time to time. Welcome to the world of social media. You get it all the time.
You've been in the comment section.
like Twitter and all that. I keep saying Twitter is my guilty pleasure. I at least pay attention and listen because they just might have a piece of information or a perspective that I hadn't considered. If it is just hateful insults, then, I tend to switch it off, but don't bother with it. But it's worth listening.
Yeah.
Never underestimate the power of listening, even to someone who sounds like they're having a rant. There might be something in the rant that you might need.
Well, I always think it's really helpful to build empathy.
Mm-hmm.
And not in the sense of agreement, but in the sense of, let me understand this other person's perspective inside out. Because if you can go in with that, actually, you're going to be a much better negotiator, because you're going to know what's important to them and where you've got leverage.
And you think of people like Carl Rogers, who believe very passionately about the power of listening. You think of that whole person-centered approach to things. I'm going to oversimplify it, so a lot of person-centered counselors listening to me are probably going to tear strips off me for getting this wrong. But ultimately, you can boil it down to, help me understand you, teach me about you, tell me about you. That's your empathy. You're actually listening to someone. So even when there's a lot of vitriol and stuff like that, there is a lot of healing in just being heard. Sometimes people run out of steam, they run out of the energy, and then they start actually telling you what is going on, what the actual problem is. Say, we never underestimate the power of actually listening to someone.
Yeah.
What's it feel like when you're listened to? There you go.
We have other questions.
Okay.
So, how do you find the motivation to take care of yourself and do things for yourself after an abusive relationship? I would say,
okay, so
yeah, I'm happy to start with that one. I would say that the doing things sometimes comes before the motivation.
I would agree. Yeah.
Yeah. So start with the basics. Eat, sleep.
Yeah.
Have a bit of a routine.
Yeah. What I would say is, yeah, it comes to actually doing it. How do you motivate yourself in the first place? Well, pay attention to what happens if you don't. Like, sometimes we have something, we don't have the energy, we don't have the motivation, we're done, we feel we're exhausted, and that could well be the case. Sometimes what we actually need, we need a break. There's nothing wrong with a duvet day once in a while. And that becomes the default setting, it's probably not a good thing. That duvet day, that rest, that withdrawing from people, even if it's just for an afternoon, what we're doing is we're recharging, we can be creative, we can gather our thoughts, we can, do you know what? My default is always just lie on the sofa and watch The Empire Strikes Back. It doesn't matter if you could just read it line for line, whatever it is, whatever you feel. Then you think about where you would like to be. How do you self-care? Well, what would self-care look like? Only you know what that is. Self-care is not downing a bottle of whiskey, for instance. That's not necessarily self-care. Self-care could be your diet. If you're comfort eating, if you're eating junk food, convenience foods, again, that's all right once in a while as a treat. That's probably not good for you in the longer term. Where you would like to be, how things would like to be, even give yourself a time scale, this time next year, whatever it is, use your imagination and be creative. But even if you don't have the energy to do the things that you've decided would be in your best interest, then pay attention to what happens if you don't.
Yeah. Well, I would also say, you know what? You start also acknowledging that it's hard.
Yeah.
So it's not like, oh God, I can't do anything. You're so crap. You can't even get out of bed. I would say, okay, I'm getting out of bed because I care about myself enough to get out of bed. And then I'm having a shower because I care about myself enough to have a shower. And I would also suggest take the everyday activities that you are doing anyway, and try to do them with an attitude of looking after yourself.
Yeah. Some people find it. Sorry, go ahead. I was going to say it really depends on the person. Some people find, different therapeutic approaches, coaching approaches, whatever it is. Sometimes if you find a way to be able to measure it, and a way of measuring something is, if you put yourself, how hard is it to do what it is you want to do on a scale? Number 1, it's easy, not a problem. 10, it's like there's, hordes of the enemy racing at you with guns and spears and torches and pitchforks and what have you. So going to be really difficult. Haven't the energy, whatever it is. So you put yourself on that scale, but you put yourself on it honestly. Sometimes we'll say it is a 10. because it's too hard. Really, because we're not really regulating how we feel. If we were honest, it might be a 5, it might be a 6, it could even be an 8, which is still quite high. What we often try to do is we want a push of a button, a flick of a switch, a Jedi mind trick, whatever it is, a combination of words, an inspirational meme we see on the internet, and that's going to fix everything. That'll give us the motivation. That's going to take it away. If you put yourself on that scale, and let's say you even are an 8, then all you do is you ask yourself, what would make it 1 point easier? Just 1 point. What brings it down to a 7? Not what takes it away, not what makes it, you glide through it effortlessly. Just 1 point. That could be something as simple as, I'll have a cup of coffee before I start this. I'll go for a walk before I start this. I'll have a shower before I leave the house. It just could be something simple like that. And if it's something you can't do right now, then what? It's something that you maybe plan to do the first chance you get. As soon as I get home from work, first thing in the morning, Saturday, as soon as I'm off, you start putting those things into place. It's when you start to measure things like that, what you might find is over a period of time, you begin at an 8, but after a while, it's a 2.
Yeah.
But it takes, I suppose, a bit of self-discipline, a bit of encouragement.
Yeah, but it's the it's like someone else said, the motivation comes after.
Yeah. Speaking to someone who hasn't seen the inside of a gym from he was 18, but yeah, I get that. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's true. You reap the benefits of doing it, and then you begin to feel better for doing it.
And that's another good way of measuring it. When you notice the difference afterwards, you pay attention to that difference, because that's what you build on. A lot of times we focus on the difficulty, we focus on the pain. We pay attention as well to those other parts, those other things. Just realized I'm really way down low there.
There you go.
See me
a lot better.
Suddenly I look taller. Yeah. You pay attention to those things as well, that they do become easier, and you do feel motivated with that little more energy.
Yeah. There's another question in the chat. Narcissistic personality people are attracted to autistic ADHD people. Love to know your views on this, as I have been diagnosed with autism and ADHD as an adult.
I would have probably a different take on this than a lot of people. I'd be interested, Ruth, and it's okay because I know that you've studied personality disorders and so on. Are you okay to take this question? And I'll just get back.
I don't think they're attracted specifically. People with very strong narcissistic traits, they're trying it on with everyone.
Well, that was pretty much going to be my take.
Right. But I think where people with neurodivergence can become more vulnerable is partly because, particularly if you've got autistic tendencies, it's harder for you to spot the nuances.
Yeah.
And maybe like when someone's behaviors and actions are not, or behaviors and words are not kind of matching up, or their behavior is confusing, it's much harder for someone who's on the autistic spectrum to be like, what the, no, like that's not okay. And also, if you have got lots of message throughout childhood that you're not good enough, that you've been the naughty kid, you've been the kid that people don't understand, or you do things wrong and people get irritated with you, you're probably much more prone to self-blame. So I think that's my view. And there's not really, I have looked, there's a little bit of research on this that says people with ADHD may be more vulnerable both to being abusive and to being abused. And I don't know anything about whether there's research in autism. I haven't looked specifically. But that would be clinically, that would be my take, that you're potentially more vulnerable because of the neurodivergence.
Yeah. I think,
yeah.
I was going to say, I would agree. I would concur. It's what you find sometimes. It's like people talk about the bully in the playground or the bully in the workplace. Why do they keep coming to me? Why do they gravitate towards me? You probably find they don't. They try it on with everybody.
Yeah.
It's the person who maybe shrugs it off as a joke or doesn't stand up for themselves or doesn't. They're the people they keep coming back to. And it's the same with those who are kind of self-serving, those who it's their own agenda. All they want is a bit of supply, narcissistic supply. The people that are easier for them to manipulate are the people they will gravitate towards.
Yeah. Agree.
Which is why people always talk about, why do they always go for the empath? Why do they always go for the compassionate people? Well, who else is going to put up with their crap? Who else is going to give them and cut them a bit of slack? Who else is going to feel sympathy for them?
Yeah. But I'd be interested, Tim, whether that resonates, whether you think that's the case. I have to say hello to Sarah, who is Class to Be Milkshake. Sarah's got a brilliant YouTube channel herself.
I know.
It was so much insight into what people with on the kind of NPD spectrum, how they think, how they are. And what do you know? It works for narcissists too, that if you repeat the same, if you repeat changing your behaviors to be more healthy, it does get better.
Yeah. And again, it's like I say, it's paying attention to the positive outcomes that we get from it is what encourages that behavior to continue.
Yeah. It's a good question. How do you know what to bring to a therapist when there's so much? But a recent straw has broken the camel's back, prompts you to seek help. Do you share all, hold back, start where?
I would say you start where you want to start. Not necessarily talking about even what the problems are, but you start where you want to start, even if the start is what you would like to get from the therapy. And what I would say as well, and this is not uncommon, because I've even done this myself, I'm a big believer in if it's important, it'll come up. Because sometimes I always ask my clients, is there anything particular you might like to focus on today? And sometimes they do. They might have something. Other times it's no, not really, and that's fine. That's okay. It's not that we're just going to sit there and talk about the price of bread or whatever. No, if it's important, it'll come up. Some people might go to therapy because of something like work-related stress or something. Or they might go because they're at a crossroads in their life and they're not quite sure which direction to take. And that's perfectly fine. Quite commonly, other things come up in the therapy because if it's important, it'll come up. So someone might be there for work-related stress. But as a session or two goes on, and people start to get a sense of how different things might be related and connected and so on, they might start talking about other things, their relationship with this person, their experience that happened that time or whatever. And that's okay, because you might be talking about things you didn't come with originally, and that's perfectly okay. Your therapist is there to sit with you through this, to talk through this with you, to help you understand what's going on with you and to help you navigate ways through, improve, and all the rest of it. So it's perfectly okay wherever it is you would like to start.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah.
And I think people vary. I think some people will come in and they just spill.
Yeah.
Spill the guts, and that's fine, but it can also feel a bit overwhelming for them, actually.
Yeah.
And other people, they give you just a little bit at a time.
Yeah.
It takes a little while to build up. So I would say start wherever you want to start.
Yeah. And something I would say about counseling as well. It doesn't matter what the approach is. It doesn't matter who the therapist is. It doesn't matter what certificates they have on their wall. A lot of the work is done in the relationship with the therapist. And sometimes it's not uncommon, because I've been like this even years before I was a therapist and I was seeing a counselor at the time. You're maybe at the third or fourth session before you feel comfortable enough to start talking about why you're really there.
Yeah.
And that's not, you haven't wasted any sessions, not at all. You're getting to know the therapist and you're feeling a bit more comfortable with them, and you realize that they're not there to tell you you're right or wrong. They're not going to give you a list of 10 things to go and do and have a better life. That's not how it works. And it might take those 2, 3, sometimes even 4 sessions to get a sense of that. And then you can talk about why you're really there. It's perfectly okay.
I agree. Yeah, just take your time.
Mm.
Do whatever you want to do.
And even I would say this because sometimes I will say to my clients, if I ask you a question, you don't really feel comfortable talking about it or answering it, or if I might, suggest some kind of intervention that you might want to try and you don't see the point in it, or if I start asking questions and you feel we're going down a route that's got nothing to do with it, just say to me, I'm not going to be offended. It's your process,
Yeah.
not mine. But what I will do is I will explain to you why I think it might be important, or why I think it might be connected, or why I think it could be useful. That's as much as I will do. But it's really, it always comes back to whatever it is you want to focus on.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree.
Mm.
So thank you for that, Sarah.
Empath, Sir Gross. The empath strikes back.
I think it's not a diagnostic term. There's a lot of people call themselves empaths, and I'm like, oh, interesting. What do you mean by that?
And this is the thing about empathy. Empathy is, again, there's different kinds of empathy. There's a very compassionate empathy, which is what people often think about when they're talking about empaths. But I remember I was giving a talk once. I thought they were gonna, burn me at the stake for saying this. Some of the most evil, sadistic people you will ever meet have empathy because
Oh yeah,
they know what hurts because it would hurt them. They
yeah.
also know what flatters because it would flatter them. Now it's what we call a dark empathy.
That's getting into psychopathy territory.
Oh yeah, yeah. So thinking that empathy makes you the good guy, not necessarily. I have to say, some of the most wicked people you'll ever meet have empathy. But what I do say about empathy when we're talking about compassionate empathy, it's a good thing to have. God knows, I think the world needs more empathetic people. But without boundaries, it can be self-destructive.
Mm-hmm.
People will take advantage of it.
Mm-hmm. You need to, when you have compassion, you have to also have compassion for yourself.
Oh yeah.
That's key.
And when we think about empathy and boundaries and things like that, I said on a live stream once, sometimes it's recognizing the difference between caring about and caring for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Difference between
More.
someone and trying to rescue them, trying to fix them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
Yeah, there was a question actually in another question from someone in my comments. It said, and I think it's very relevant. That's why I'm bringing it up. The question was, how do you diffuse a violent situation between a narcissistic father and the trauma bonded mother? And I'm like, oh, that's a very challenging question.
That is a very challenging question. Repeat it again. Narcissistic father and
Narcissistic father, trauma bonded mother,
a trauma bonded
and a
mother.
violent situation between the two of them.
A violent situation. I would say with great caution.
I would also say it's not, even if you're an adult, it isn't your responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
But I also know saying that is incredibly difficult because you're potentially seeing your mother in a very dangerous situation where she could get very seriously hurt.
Yeah.
At the same time, your scope of influence and power is likely limited.
Mm-hmm.
And it may be that you need to get out of the situation. You may need to get police involved.
Mm-hmm.
And I think maybe you have a conversation with the mother, particularly on her own, in a neutral location about your concerns. I think you have to be so careful about the situation you're in and ending up in the firing line.
I would say as well, having that conversation with the mother. Sometimes when we're having that conversation, we're doing what we think is the best thing. And we're talking about our concerns and we're giving advice and we're doing this. Sometimes whenever we're talking to someone and trying to point out to them that the way they're being treated is not right, sometimes we might get a bit exasperated, frustrated. Sometimes we might get frustrated and angry. Why is the person not seeing this? What we cannot see sometimes, especially if this is a very close relationship, a marriage, things like that, long term, what we cannot see is someone's heart breaking right in front of us.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I say with great caution, not just about how we intervene, but even how we help that person. Again, sometimes the law might have to be involved. Laws are being broken if someone's being physically assaulted. We can give people information. What they do with it is entirely up to them. I think there's a lot of really good organizations out there. I'm thinking in the UK and Ireland, groups like Women's Aid, for instance.
Yeah.
They can give very practical advice, which is, by the way, something a therapist can't give you. They can give you very practical advice about how to stay safe. Things like that. You have things you can do, and there's the aid workers that come out, that can help you. You can meet with them privately, have a coffee. They do lots of different things. Pardon me, but even if it gets so bad that the person does need some kind of intervention, some kind of support, organizations such as Women's Aid, they are first class. I would not follow.
Women's Aid in the UK are fantastic.
Yeah,
it's so many people to them, and their freedom program. It's really good, particularly on the kind of emotional abuse and coercive control. It's really, really, really good.
Yeah.
So yeah, I rate them too a lot.
Mm-hmm. So again, it's how you intervene. It's a very difficult question. It's a difficult one. Again, it's one of those things. I don't think it's a one answer fits all.
Agree.
I suppose it even depends on the nature of the violence, because sometimes we think of physical assault, someone hitting someone. But there is also things like the damage of their property.
Mm-hmm.
There's different things like that. There's so it's really it's one of those questions you'd love to have just one definitive answer, but unfortunately
there isn't. They're horrible situations. Yeah, I felt something when I read that question. I was like, oh, you're not in a good place.
I'll tell you what it brought up for me when I heard the question. The sense of helplessness.
Yeah.
What can I do?
Yeah.
And I think a sense of helplessness is one of the most difficult things we'll ever experience.
Yeah.
People talk about the narcissistic abuse they've been through, the manipulation and the stuff that they go through. A lot of stuff coming out of that is that sense of helplessness.
Yeah.
Powerlessness.
Yeah. And it's so hard, I think, to see someone who's in that and to be on the outside, because your urge is to start telling them what to do.
Yeah. And that's what I said.
Just get out. The narcissist, get to leave. It's not that simple. And I think in a way you kind of have to, if there's scope for it. And I think, there's a different thing going on when it's your mother.
Yeah.
Because there's something weird then going on where you're acting much more like a parent than the parent is.
Yeah.
But just in general with someone, I think there's an art in trying to help them think about their situation without putting pressure on them to leave, to actually get them to re-engage their thinking and their ability to connect with parts of themselves that they've completely forgotten about.
Yeah. Like I said a moment ago, sometimes even if it is our parent and we are aware that it's a very kind of fractious, disjointed, abusive kind of relationship, it was mentioned about the trauma bonding. So we know there is still something there. There is a link there. There is a bond there. whether it was love or not, that's why I say you cannot see that inside their heart is being torn apart.
Absolutely.
So yeah, always with caution and as much gentleness as you have.
Yeah, really. Tim was asking what channel. It's Sarah's channel. It's called Cluster B Milkshake. There you go. There's a question for you.
Currently discarding my flatmate heavily and it's getting out of hand. Discarding my flatmate heavily. I'm not quite sure I understand what that means. Sorry.
Christine, if you're still here, let us know more about what you mean. I'm thinking there's some conflict with a flatmate.
Okay. That's what it sounds like.
If you want your flatmate to leave, then I think you have to go back to your contract and negotiate. But you want to do that as calmly and as constructively as possible.
Well, I mean, if people are in the same environment, what's the workplace or the same building, the same house, people talk about things like grey rock, and that does work to some degree. In other words, you don't really show anything, you don't give anything. What I would say is it doesn't necessarily mean you completely ignore the person, because we can still be pleasant, we can still be polite. What we don't do is we don't engage with talking about personal things and so on. We can still be pleasant.
Yeah, you can keep someone at a pleasant distance.
Absolutely. It's like people talk about, this person in work, a friend of mine, I've sometimes quoted her many times on my channel, some of the stuff she talks about two members of staff she had just didn't get on together. They were loggerheads. They were this, that, and the other, and wouldn't like each other. They wouldn't work together. It's almost like they were setting the agenda for the rest of the team. And one of the things she said, and she got them both into the room one day, and she says to them both, first of all, you're not paid to like each other.
That's good advice.
Paid to do your job, and you will do your job, and you will do it professionally. Point is, you can have a professional relationship.
Yeah.
Don't necessarily have to be best friends.
I've always found in house share situations, they work best if you're close friends and not the people you're living with. It's a great way to ruin a close friendship is to share a house. Okay. I've always in house shares, I like to be. The best ones were people. Some of them I lived with people I'd never met before.
I've never done that, so I can't.
And they were the best.
But okay.
There's no expectations. Everybody had their own friends.
Yeah.
If you made friends, it was a bonus, and if not, you were perfectly nice to each other, and it was fine, and no one was disappointed. But that was the best. So yeah. So I think there's a lot to be said for looking at where the boundaries are.
Yeah.
There's a good question. If you've realized that you've repressed trauma because you don't feel anything when you think of a traumatic event, how do you stop repressing it so you can heal?
First port of call, I would say, would be a therapist.
Yeah, and I would say you can't force that.
Yeah.
You can't sit there going, emote. Damn it. Emote. Like,
I should feel something here. Yeah.
And maybe you don't. And that's okay too. And maybe you just accept that right now you feel numb.
I think it is possible as well that sometimes we have been through very difficult things. Whatever they were, we have been through very difficult things. We might not necessarily have had, say, the support of a therapist or something. But what we might have had the support of, say, parents, family members, friends. If we belong to groups, community groups, church groups, whatever sporting teams we played in, we might have been surrounded by really good people. And what might have happened is, if you want to use this word processing, we have processed it It's still there, and it might still hurt or bother us from time to time, but what it's not doing is dictating what we do on a day-to-day basis. So it is possible that someone can go through something quite difficult, traumatic even, and they can heal. They kind of, if you will, they heal naturally.
You know, the majority of people who experience a traumatic event do not develop PTSD.
That's right. They
So,
have what I would describe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, they would experience what's known as post-traumatic stress. And they would experience that for somewhere, I think it's, isn't it between 4 and 8 weeks, something like that. But after a while, in that right environment with, you know, people that bring out the best in them, care about them, well, that's not necessarily pussyfoot around them or coddle them, but no, they care about them. That those symptoms start to dissipate. I think I have been left on my own here. Hold on.
I'm back.
Yeah, I'm not sure what happened there. I thought I'd been left on my own.
Sorry. I think I went to swipe the comment. And
okay.
I
Right yourself.
swiped myself out of the studio. That was not good. Anyway, you were saying?
we wouldn't be having these problems if we were doing this on analog.
No, we'll be fine.
Just saying, yeah, analog worked. I was going to say, yeah, it's that period, but I think it's between 4 to 8 weeks or something like that. You know, things might be heightened, diets change, sleep's disrupted, we're a bit more irritable, we lose our concentration, but it's after that period you find things start to go back to normal. And I think anyway, I believe it's usually because of the environment we're in, or people that care about us.
Yeah, I would agree.
You know?
And I think the duration of time is probably a little more variable.
Yeah.
You know, because there are some things you face, and if someone dies, for example, in terrible circumstances, there might be a long period of time before the funeral, and then things come up again, or there's a court case about something, things come up again. So that it can come in peaks and waves. But what I would look for is how much is it affecting your life day to day? How much is the not feeling, for example, affecting your life? Is it that you're doing lots of avoiding behaviors? That you're kind of trying not to think about things? Does it limit your life? Those are the questions I would be asking someone in assessment to find out more.
I'm just thinking about the quote, you don't feel anything when you think of a traumatic event. It's not uncommon, and it's a defense mechanism. Well, what we do sometimes is like we dissociate. So it's like we can see it, we're aware of it, but it's different ways. For instance, it's like you're watching it and it happened to someone else, or you know, it's like you're distant from that situation in that moment. One way or another, you've kind of dissociated from it. That's a defense mechanism, and I would say it's a normal one. It's like
one.
Yeah.
I can give you an example from my life.
Sure.
And you'll relate to this because you've experienced it too. Have you seen the Dairy Girls?
I've seen a couple of episodes, but yeah, I haven't seen them.
The end of the Dairy Girls is them voting in the Good Friday Agreement.
I've seen that one, yeah.
You've seen it, right? Okay. So they're voting in the Good Friday Agreement. I was 18. It was the first time I voted. It was like watching my life unfold on television.
Yeah.
I was bawling. I was in pieces on the sofa, and my partner was like, what's going on? Oh, it was my life. That's what I went through. So they captured it so well, and it was like, I didn't find that upsetting at the time. You know, for people who don't know, Darren and I are both from Northern Ireland, so we've both experienced the Troubles. And the Good Friday Agreement was basically voting to bring about a peace settlement. And it was quite, there was aspects of it that were controversial at the time. But it was a turning point. I was like, oh shit, I went through that. Wow.
Yeah.
But at the time it didn't register.
Yeah, you're right.
25 years later, sitting on my sofa in London, it's like, whew, where'd that come from?
Yeah.
And then I went to bed and it was fine.
That's a really good example.
Yeah, but just because you have because you don't feel something intensely doesn't mean there's something wrong. Just because you have a moment of intense feeling doesn't mean there's something wrong. It's about, is it affecting your day-to-day life? That's the question I'd ask.
Yeah, your day-to-day functioning, your relationship with yourself, your decision making, your relationships with the people around you. Yeah, when things start to affect, it's like the dissociation. It's a normal kind of thing, but if someone is dissociating, well, it's almost like they're zoned out.
Yeah.
You know, they're having a conversation. It's almost like they look as if they've gone into a trance or something. You know, there's a lot of different ways people can dissociate. Maybe then it's a difficulty. That maybe then there's something to look at, but in and of itself, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Just as you mentioned that, yeah, I'm thinking about the number of times I've just completely dissociated, and then it's only afterwards I'm kind of thinking, same thing, yeah, where did that come from? Why was I not thinking this at the time? Why did I not notice that at the time? Yeah.
But sometimes I think it's how you cope. Because I think if you really think about what's going on around you, actually growing up in Northern Ireland, it's a great example of it. I remember, this will really make you laugh. After 9/11, there was an anthrax scare in Canterbury Cathedral. I lived in Canterbury at the time. Everyone else was scared and panicking, and I was like a bit pissed off actually because I wanted to go shopping. And I'm only someone from Belfast would have that attitude to an anthrax.
Would see that as an inconvenience. Yeah.
It's an inconvenience to me. Damn it. I had shopping to do. Come on.
Well, again, to put this into the context for people that aren't aware of Northern Ireland, before I could drive, I'm a young teenager and I'm going to work in the mornings. I'm getting the bus every morning, and not every morning, but maybe once a month, every 2 months, once every 3 months, whatever it was, every now and again, the roads would be closed because there's there's a bomb scare. It could be a bomb, might not be. We don't know. Someone said it is, but we're not sure. You know.
Mostly it wasn't.
Yeah, mostly it wasn't. So that's why they called it a bomb scare. So I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, and there's no mobile phones in those days, and I'm looking at my watch and I'm thinking, you know, right, okay, I'm going to get it in the neck. This is the third time I've been late this week. Yeah, and I would go in and the boss would be saying, what the hell are you doing? You're late. And I says, I'm sorry, it was a bomb scare this morning. He goes, oh, another one, the third one this week. And I'm going, no, really? Yeah, as awful as it was growing up in that, it had just become so normalized. So then you get an anthrax scare in England and you're thinking, this is an inconvenience. I wanted to go shopping.
Yeah. But I think it's also functional. Because if you go about your life thinking you're about to be blown up at any moment, that's not functional either. So I think we pathologize these defense mechanisms too much. Some of them are very normal. And sometimes actually it's just being aware that they're there and being aware of, is this a good effect or not so good effect? You know? And to me, it was a great effect because actually lots of people didn't want to go shopping, and I went and the shops were very quiet. So my defense mechanism served me well.
Okay.
But there we go. How can BPD look like NPD? And how do you explain to a loved one that just because behaviors can look similar doesn't mean you have NPD?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. How can you explain that? Well, first of all, I guess it's how open is the other person to the information. I think a lot of things can be difficult to sometimes spot because sometimes we look at a behavior and we jump to a conclusion. I know there's different diagnostic criteria for that, but I think when you look at repeated patterns of behavior, when I make a video and if it's about narcissism, you know, I will say, you know, I'll talk about the common characteristics: being disagreeable, sense of entitlement, being resistant to criticism, among other things. And what I try to emphasize is these things are, you know, they're all time. It's like all day, every day, twice on a Sunday. They're not just once in a while. Because if you were to look at some of those characteristics and traits, hands up anybody who's never disagreeable. Hands up anybody who doesn't feel a sense of entitlement on some level. I worked hard for this. I deserve it.
Absolutely.
You know, Hands up anybody who doesn't struggle with criticism sometimes. They're either sensitive to it because they're insulted, or they're resistant to it because it's really unfair. Every single one of us have these things. So there are some things that it can be difficult to distinguish between one thing and the other. I'm trying to think on my feet here as I'm saying. Yeah, you imagine someone promises to do something. You ask them to do something for you, and they promise to do it, and they don't do it. Are they a narcissist? Well, they could be, because no one's in charge of them.
That's not enough to.
No. Or it could be they could have an avoid personality.
Mm-hmm.
They could have an anxiety disorder. They promise to do it with good intentions, but the more they're thinking about it, the more this is bringing up distress. They could be histrionic. The only reason they said they would do it is they had an audience and they looked amazing. Everyone was saying, "Oh, aren't you wonderful?" They had no intention to do it. They've probably forgotten about it. They're all getting someone else to pay them attention. There can be different reasons behind different things. It's about sometimes looking at the behavior over a long period of time, but also looking at the motivations behind it, because there can be motivations. So sometimes you get the same behavior, but there's a different motivation behind it.
Mm.
Might not be all the time. That's the other thing.
Yeah. I would also say to your relative or a loved one, put the psychiatric diagnoses away. Because psychiatric diagnoses are very useful for guiding treatment. Okay, they're not necessarily very useful for understanding someone who's close to you.
Yeah.
So it's far more helpful for you and them to talk about both of your experiences, how you're seeing the other one's behavior, to build empathy for each other. That doesn't mean you have to agree with each other. You don't have to see things in the same way. Neither of you need to be right. Neither of you need to be wrong. And I think that's probably a lot more constructive for your relationship than a debate about whether you have BPD or MPD.
I would add to that. That's a really good point. What I would add to that is, when you're talking about the things that you're struggling with about someone's behavior, you talk about it from your own perspective, because you're the one that has the problem with it. And it's what that problem is and what that means to you. Not to say it isn't a problem, because it obviously is. But you talk about why it's an issue, why it's difficult, why it needs to change somehow. And you can do that, again, going back to that art of negotiation, doing that without, if you will, trying to shoehorn someone into doing something.
Right. And I think if you can do that well, you start to get very useful information about the other person and what scope there is for a good relationship between you, which may mean in some cases you put more distance in, and in some cases it builds more closeness. So yeah. But I think it doesn't sound like a great situation when you're debating what psychiatric diagnosis you have in a close relationship.
Fair point, it isn't.
That would be my view. That was the one we talked about earlier. Neurodivergence creates a whole set of childhood challenges that can shape how someone's personality and their relationships develop. So I would say that's what's interesting to look at. How did your neuro differences, whatever they may be, affect your friendships, your relationships with your parents, your relationships with your teachers, how you related to other kids? How did that shape your view of yourself? How does that shape your view of relationships now? That's, I think, probably where it's more interesting to look at. And if you have ADHD, treat it. Because it will help with the other cluster B issues.
I did talk to someone, I think it was about a year or so ago, about neuro divergence. When it was maybe more her field. She had a lot of insight into it. It's not really my field. I do work with people who have different things come up in the sessions as we're talking, but it is something I maybe would like to learn a bit more about. What I would say about, people who are highly narcissistic and borderline, it's like I said a moment ago, all of us have certain behaviors and traits. It doesn't necessarily mean it's some kind of a disorder. And sometimes we have certain characteristics and traits that may become more dominant in certain situations.
Yeah.
When like someone says, this person has a problem with anger, they need anger management problems. They don't have a problem with their anger. It's just that sometimes they can only be pushed so far. They can only be teased so far. They can only be disappointed and let down so much that they're going to get angry and they're going to raise their voice. That doesn't mean they have an anger management problem. We all have different traits, behaviors, characteristics, and so on. And as I say, a lot of time they might be situational and they might come out in different circumstances to different degrees. I'm not sure if that answers the question or not, but it's my take on it anyway.
Yeah. And then someone asking about the difference between NPD and BPD. I think what would the difference? I think in NPD you get much stronger sense of entitlement and much more in the way of avoidant attachment styles. It's much more distancing and withdrawal.
I know this sounds like a subtle kind of difference, and you might wonder what the difference is. I think with NPD, there is a fear of rejection because they are, again, they're unique, they're special, they're entitled, and all that sort of thing. With NPD, it's not so much a fear of rejection; it's almost this absolute terror of being abandoned, which is a lot.
With BPD.
Yeah, with BPD, sorry. It's the fear of abandonment. I think you also see a lot more emotional dysregulation. You do get that with NPD to a certain degree, but with the BPD, it's an emotional dysregulation, not really able to manage very, very difficult emotions. And the biggest difference, and again, this comes down to the individual and how deeply ingrained these traits are. With narcissism, remember, it's everybody else's fault. There's a difficulty taking responsibility. It's everybody else's fault. It's very, very hard to self-reflect. With BPD, what you often find is you might get explosive behavior, but more often than not, you get a lot of depression afterwards because there's a lot of regret.
Yeah.
Someone with BPD feels a lot of regret because they have just pushed away someone that they're terrified of abandoning them. So they're caught in this terrible kind of this internal situation. So I think they are different. There's more to it than that, but I think there are some of the differences.
Yeah, I agree. They're also highly comorbid. You have one, you're at risk for having the other, or some traits of the other. And I kind of think, again, I come back to it, like, how valuable is a psychiatric diagnosis here? To me, it's much more interesting to understand the particular dynamics of that person and their relationships than it is to split hairs between BPD and NPD.
Yeah.
Where it's maybe useful is in directing treatment to a certain extent, and maybe which therapist, because some of us are better fits than others to work with those populations. So I think recognizing it can help with that side of things. But I think when it boils down to it, it's much more interesting just to know about the individual.
Yeah. Teach me about you. Help me understand you.
Yeah. Tim's giving good advice about the housemate situation. Speak to the landlord, spend time away from each other. And hello, Rayan. I don't know if I've said your name right. You can correct me. But did ask a good question. What factors could be worked on to ease the expression of empathy?
The expression of empathy.
And then there's some more follow-up. Because I've noticed it's easier to express empathy towards some and harder towards others. And wanted to share something if someone could relate. One night I had severe anxiety episode, and it's like suddenly I forgot my identity. There's a lot of questions.
There's a lot to unpack there, yeah. What I would say about the empathy is, think about the difference between caring about and caring for. We have different relationships. We are going to care a lot more for, say, a family member, a brother, a sister, a child, a parent, than we are for someone who works in the same building as us. You know, so there's going to be different levels of sympathy, empathy, and things like that. It doesn't mean we don't necessarily care because we show more sympathy and care towards one person than another. But there are different levels. It's human nature. It's our relationships, our relationship styles, and so on.
Yeah, I'd be also interested in what, like, who's easy and who's it difficult to have empathy for? And what's the pattern for you?
Who do they remind you of? Yeah.
Yeah. And that would be kind of interesting. And kind of think, yeah, and I also think be clear, like, what do you mean by empathy?
But even saying expressing empathy towards some is harder than towards others. Sometimes think of that relationship, because you might have someone who is quite open to hearing, not just empathy, but hearing what you think, how you feel. You can be more open and honest with them because they're going to be open and honest with you. There are going to be other people that, you try to talk to them. They might change the subject. They might laugh in your face. They might tell you get over yourself. So they're not that easy to be open with. So again, as Ruth Ann was saying, have a look at who it is you're struggling with, because it could be who they remind you of. It could be the interactions you have with each other. There could be any number of things going on.
Yeah. Yeah. If you realize you have narcissistic traits, how do you go about changing, and how long will it take?
A lot of easy questions.
Oh yeah, we're going with the easy ones tonight.
Every single one of us have narcissistic traits. I would go as far as saying there's a healthy, normal level of narcissism.
I agree. That was another question someone asked me, the spectrum of narcissism.
Oh, okay. A healthy level, I believe, is your own self-interest.
Yeah.
At its very minimum, a big tiger runs at you. It's your survival instinct. You just want to stay safe. You want to work hard. You want to do a course in something. You want to apply for a better job than the one you have, if you will. This is your narcissism. It's your self-interest. You go on a date with someone. You put on your aftershave, your best dancing trousers. You hope she's going to like you. That's your narcissism. She said about the spectrum, yeah. There's the healthy narcissism, and then it goes sort of like up this scale. I call it a spectrum because there's different colors, shades, and many different intensities. You get someone who's just self-absorbed. All they want to do is talk about themselves. Doesn't matter what it is. Someone could be telling you, about they've just broken their leg, it's an agony, and you want to tell them about your skiing holiday, There's different things going on, right up to the point where you get, and when we talk about like malignant narcissism, not even talking about narcissistic personality disorder, not most of it, but then you're talking about people who are on what's known as the dark personality, and the dark triad, the dark tetrad, and that is comorbid with other things. Not enough for a clinical diagnosis, but very strong traits in different areas. It's psychopathy, that's being callous.
Yeah.
Machiavellianism, that's being duplicitous and manipulative. There's the narcissism, which is being self-absorbed and entitled. When you get to the dark tetrad, there's that other element, and that's sadism. That is using pain and misery to control others, or to get pleasure from inflicting pain and misery. So there's many, many different kinds. It's never really a one size fits all. It really depends about your narcissistic traits. Well, your narcissistic traits might come and go in different situations and in different relationships. You might be narcissistic in work, but only in the sense that you want to be the one that reaches a target and gets that bonus at the end of the month. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's quite a healthy thing.
Yeah. I would suggest I'd also suggest you can have not enough narcissism. I can never be special. I can never shine. I can never put myself forward. I'm just going to be the wallflower. It's very quiet. And let everyone else do everything because I don't want to be
And
seen.
there is as
That's
well that recent stuff I've been reading up on. I did a video on it a while ago. Egoism, and that's actually it's the fear of being seen as being narcissistic. Having any kind of self-interest. I'd best not work too hard because I might get the bonus and people will think I'm greedy. Yeah, you know, so there is an unhealthy kind of side to that.
Yeah. But if you're at the higher end of the spectrum, the fact that you're realizing it and are interested in changing those are good signs.
Yeah.
Right? And I would say do not watch most internet materials about narcissism because they paint a very stereotyped caricature.
Yeah.
And it's not necessary. It doesn't reflect the full spectrum. It reflects, I think, a narrow type of person who's tipping into that dark tetrad. Usually.
When the traits are so deeply ingrained, whenever maybe you are in a personality disorder sort of scenario or in that dark, I think that's when someone has got to that point where they have, if you will, they've crossed that bridge. I think before you get that, because you could have someone who is narcissistic, they're self-absorbed, but one day there's something hits them and they realize, if I keep doing this, I'm going to lose this job. No one wants to work with me. If I keep behaving like this, he's going to leave me, she's going to leave me. Someone maybe gets that and they realize other things as well. Whenever they're not like that, the times whenever they're good fun, they're relaxed, they're in the moment, and maybe they are showing a little bit of care, they're sharing a joke with people, they seem to get more from those kinds of interactions. So they start to learn different things. It's when, if you will, they cross that bridge, that Rubicon, whatever it is, I think that's when they get to the point where the problem lies out. I'm already perfect. The problem lies outside of me. So if the problem lies outside of me, so does the solution. Other people have to do it. Other people have to change. Whatever it is you're accusing me of, I wouldn't be like this if it wasn't for you.
There's no change going to happen there. But I think, reflecting on yourself, and I think also it's really helpful to think about what change actually means. Because I think there's an idea that one day you're going to have no difficult feelings. You're never going to get irritated or start a fight. You're never going to, that's not real life. No one's like that. But hopefully what you get is triggered much less easily. You're able to be much more thoughtful about your reactions. You're able to think, am I spoiling for a fight here for fun? Or is there actually something worth fighting for? And if there is something worth fighting for, how am I going to do it in the most constructive way? And it's kind of
the best outcome for everybody, the win-win.
Absolutely. So I think it's over time, and I don't think you see it less as like here's the end goal and more how am I evolving over months and years. And that doesn't mean like, oh, you're so messed up, it's going to take years to change as a person. It's like, you're always evolving. All of us are. Just go in a good direction.
And every single one of us have elements of us that we don't like. Carl Jung would talk about our shadow self, those elements of us that are not just unacceptable to other people, but they're unacceptable to us. If we're not aware of those, what we tend to do is we tend to dump them out and project them on, blame everybody else for them. When we're aware of them, we're aware of our flaws, we're aware of our errors, we're aware that sometimes we can be the bad guy, even though we don't like it, we are going to be the villain. If we're aware of things like that, we integrate them, and what we can do is we can rein them in. So we might have an ego wound, just like anybody could have. We don't necessarily react. We can respond, we don't react. Sometimes we have to pay attention, and if we were honest with ourselves, we'd be saying, actually, I did make a bit of a fool of myself there, Doesn't feel good, but we can own it, we can acknowledge it, and we'll know not to do it again. So we integrate those parts of ourselves. And I think the thing with narcissism, again, there's that difficulty being able to be introspective. They don't have a shadow self. They're perfect.
I think there's a difficulty for someone who's very high in narcissistic traits of acknowledging, maybe I was a bit of a shit there.
Yeah.
Maybe I actually was the asshole.
Mm.
And that doesn't make you an irredeemable monster or unlovable or that you're going to get rejected now. That actually you can be like, you know what? I was the asshole. I'm actually sorry.
Yeah.
It's not something I want to do again. With that ability to start accepting, I have these tricky things. There are tricky aspects of me. And that does not make me a monster.
Yeah.
That's, I think, when you get to there, you're a very long way into the journey.
And I think just to emphasize what you said a moment ago, how long will it take? Life's a journey. How long is your life going to take? It's a journey. It's not a mad dash to a finish line.
Yeah. And I think as well, the environments you end up in have a huge impact on this. It's like if you are surrounded by some good friends and you have a kind of a job that allows you to live a decent lifestyle, to work a good amount and feel productive and be proud of what you do and also pursue some other interests and activities, that's a much better position than if you're in a situation where all your relationships are filled with conflict, where your workplace is a disaster zone.
Everything is a competition. Yeah.
So context really matters. You know, so it's not just about go to therapy now and fix yourself. I would say look a bit more widely than that. And can you find environments that aren't a bit different, even if they feel a bit uncomfortable at first? They're kind of not ultra competitive environments. Take up a hobby that you're crap at and do it for fun.
That's probably the best advice I've ever heard.
That is good advice.
You're crap at. Yeah, I love it. I love that. That's good.
Take up and just do it for fun.
Yeah.
And don't try to be the best.
You don't have to be the best. Yeah.
You know, take up a team sport where you have to have some team spirit. You know, those are things. So, people are talking about Ryan's panic attack, where he forgot his identity, and I think that's probably true. That's probably right.
Could be, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one for your own doctor or therapist. I'm newly diagnosed having NPD, and this might be weird, but what is an example of a person with NPD who is not abusive but toxic? I don't have any of my old friends around, so I can't ask them. Look, you don't have to be toxic because you have NPD. You know? Same thing as I said before. You have some tricky parts of your personality. Doesn't make you toxic. But you got to look at your behavior and you got to look at how you are in your relationships. And the fact that you have some old friends that you can reconnect with, nurture your relationships.
If you can't get into contact with your old friends, make new ones.
Absolutely.
Healthy, supportive relationships. This is the thing about healthy, supportive relationships. It's not just that they're supporting you. You're supporting them as well. Make it a mutual thing.
There's a lot of questions. Hang on. So, and I don't see myself as the only toxic. A lot of my old friends also have you see, this happens. This is where I think context is really, really important, because if you do have NPD or you have narcissistic traits and you're all of your friends are also on that cluster B spectrum, that's going to be dramatic. And that's not about saying, oh, people with cluster B are toxic, but that combination, that's not a good combination. You need to have some friendships with people who are going to bring out the best in you.
Yeah.
And I would also say, you probably were not 100% in the wrong. I think there is this tendency to think narcissist is the bad guy, the other one is the good one. And actually, I'm not justifying abusive behavior. The abusive behavior is solely the responsibility of the abusive person. But there's a whole lot of conflict and antagonism in relationship where I don't think blame has to be 50-50, but it does take two. And I would suggest to you that focus on building some healthier friendships with people who are not generally people who struggle with their relationships, who can be a good role model for you.
A good role model,
yeah.
Someone you can model yourself off. As I say, it's people that can be supportive of you and bring out the best in you. But in order to make it a healthy relationship, you bring out the best in them and you're supportive to them as well. There's that healthy level of paying attention to ourselves, but then there's that healthy level of paying attention to other people as well. And it's trying to find that balance. Not always easy to find the balance, but we find that balance. And that balance isn't going to be the same, by the way, in every situation, in every relationship. But we do kind of, when we persevere, we kind of get there at the end. Paying attention to ourselves, but also paying attention to other people and just finding that space in between.
Yeah. But I also think finding those little pockets where you can have a healthier relationship. So, if you have NPD, I'm going to guess your family life is a bit dramatic, or there's probably a lot of conflict in your family. So I would suggest you do need to find communities where you have different experience of relationship and intentionally go in there to give yourself those experiences. If it's in the workplace, or join a class that interests you. And it doesn't have to be super close, especially at first. Just give yourself some new experiences. Because the idea that you're going to work on your behaviors in a highly conflicted, antagonistic relationship ain't going to happen. And I give the same advice to the person who doesn't have NPD, who's got lots of relationships with narcissistic people. I'm like, you are not going to learn how to hold good boundaries in a relationship with a highly narcissistic person
who will keep on trying to cross them.
Go learn how to swim in the shallow end of the pool, and then we'll talk about diving in the deep end later. But it's the same for the narcissistic person. Go and learn how to swim in the shallow end, and later on we can practice in the more antagonistic, challenging relationships. Anyway, let me know if that's helpful. Oh, this one's for you, Darren. I'm giving it to you.
A lot of hosts of coaches and therapists online build a platform out of victims of NPD. How do you navigate all these different voices on the topic? Carefully. There are a lot of people out there who talk about different things. Talk about narcissism, talk about abuse, talk about whatever. I think it's if you're watching somebody, pay attention when you're watching to them. Are they okay to get it wrong? Are they okay to make a mistake? Because sometimes they might do something. Sometimes I pronounce someone's name wrong, or I forget to add the research into a description, and I get called out on that. I'm generally okay with it, because it was a genuine mistake. But then sometimes you might get someone, and it's almost like they become very, very defensive, very vitriolic. So really wonder what's going on there. I would also be careful of whenever you see a title that says something like how to beat the narcissist, how to win against the narcissist, how to put the narcissist, how to do this, how to do it. those things, that might just be what I've learned the term is clickbait. It could just be that they could really have genuinely good information. But when I see something like that, it switches me off, because it doesn't matter whether it's narcissism, borderline, even avoidant person. It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter what cluster belongs to. You don't go poking these things with a stick. You don't throw stones at them for entertainment. You don't do these things. To me, that helps nobody. Sometimes it could put you into a very, very dangerous situation. So I would be paying attention to those sorts of things, the sort of things they're trying to tell you. Sometimes you get some really, really good advice. Sometimes you get some really good information. There are some really, really good people out there whose names I can't remember, because I can't remember who it is I watch. But you get some really good. Good. Tell you what, you know who's very, very good. Here's an example of a really good person with a good channel. Jay Reid. He talks about families. He talks about families of origin, narcissistic families. If you watch his channel, you'll notice, and this is what I try to do, and I miss it sometimes. He will talk about something and he will do it without the drama. He will be factual. He will talk about the research from time to time. He will talk about ways to navigate it, and they're very helpful things. They're not like, you stand your ground, you look him in the eye and you say these exact words. You don't get nonsense like that. So if you look at his channel, I think his channel is a really, really good example of a useful channel that's worthwhile, who's someone who knows their subject. Other times, as I say, you get people, and I think they're just creating a lot of drama. It's clickbait and so on. It's very, very hard to navigate. I get things wrong. I look back some of my old videos and I realize I've got something wrong. I made a mistake. To say I mispronounced something, or I forgot to add this, or I said it was this and I meant to say that. It just stupidly edited or something. If someone is aware that they've made a mistake, then fair enough. But again, someone's going to be very defensive and tell you, no, actually, you're right, because this is the way it is. Maybe they're not the kind of people to be watching. I don't know if that answers your question, but they're just my thoughts on it.
I know Alexander comments on my thing, and I did make a video recently titled something like, "Is the narcissistic abuse industry toxic?" And I think there is a kind of almost moral panic. Like, the narcissists are coming, the narcissists are going to get you, and they're everywhere, and you need to spot the red flags, and you need to have no contact. And I'm like, life's not really like that.
Yeah.
And that's not to say there aren't people who are very antagonistic, abusive, who are best off at a great distance, if not out of your life entirely. But I started my channel because I was fed up with bad information online about narcissism. I'm like, these people are talking rubbish, and it wasn't you. It's okay.
I had started my channel. I wanted to talk about things like work-related stress, and they're easy things for me. But then I thought the best way to get some kind of engagement, and so that it would always give me something fresh to talk about, I wouldn't have to go looking for ideas. I get the audience to do the work for me. I would say, if there's any subjects you want me to cover. Now, sometimes I do get people want me to talk about borderline. They want me to talk about avoidance. They want me to talk about anxiety. They want me to talk about stalking, and I like doing that. But the majority of the comments and questions I get are about narcissistic relationships, the common characters and traits of this and that and the other. What I decided to do when I started doing the live streams, I don't think you can really do this in a video. Some people they can do it within 5 or 10 minutes, and good for them. I don't think I can do this. I decided I'll do the videos, and I will do the videos talking about whatever the subject is. But when I do the live streams, I'm going to talk about what something actually means, how to maybe deal with something a little bit better. I've talked about things like our shadow self, I mentioned a moment ago. I've talked about just things like the Johari window. I talk about different little psychological concepts that I hope people find helpful. They get to know themselves a little bit better. They can maybe apply these things. I get more out of doing that than I do talking about, 10 minutes talking about the particular behavior associated with something. As much as I do like doing that, I do get a lot more out of doing a live stream, talking about practical things,
Yeah.
about dealing, recognizing anger. What is anger? What does it mean? How do you express it? And so how to recognize your triggers. What exactly is a trigger in the first place? I don't know. I just it's kind of the
Live
way.
streams are fun because you get that engagement and you
Mm,
get to. I really struggle making talking head videos, although I make them, because that's not my natural way of being.
I'm not a natural presenter.
It's like, no, my natural way of being is with another person in dialogue.
I
I
even
do
struggle. I even struggle with the live streams. I said it a couple of times. It's so much easier if there's people and I can see their faces. I'm not. All I'm seeing is myself. It's like talking into a mirror, but I do get to see
tough.
comments. I would not consider myself to be a natural presenter. Not at
Yeah.
all. I struggle with it.
But there's a question for you. How do you navigate a lifetime of narcissistic abuse, which leaves you believing that you were wrong to blame and on some level imagining it all, despite rationally seeing the abuse?
Okay, this is the thing about our beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
Our beliefs are either fact or feeling. There's no third one. If you can find a third one, please share it. It is either fact or it is feeling. Now, sometimes those feelings may be based on facts, but they may be facts that are not relevant to this situation. They may be based on facts that were true once, not necessarily true now. When it comes to abuse, sometimes they are based on things we were led to believe. Led to believe.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to our beliefs, there's different ways. People use CBT, use schema therapy, and so on. It doesn't really matter what the approach is. Psychodynamic, I think, is quite good when it comes to beliefs and our internal relationship with ourselves as much as with the world around us. Understanding what those beliefs are, being able to explore them, challenge them, or whatever you want, whatever way you want to phrase it.
Yeah.
You look for the evidence for them, you look for the evidence against them. If our beliefs cannot stand up to scrutiny, sometimes we need to ask ourselves, why are we still holding on to them? A lot of times we're led to believe that we were the problem because it was easier for someone to tell us we were the problem for them to say, I was the one who was being the jerk. I hated the thought of you being happy. It really bugged me to see you being successful. I only felt good about me when I saw you feel like nothing. No one's going to admit that to you.
No.
That ain't going to happen.
No. I think what I would suggest is I'm really practical about these things. You need some new experiences.
Yeah. Prove yourself wrong.
You need to put a little bit of investment into some friendships, relationships with colleagues, therapists, doesn't matter who.
Yeah.
You need to have experiences with other people. And then I think I think the other thing that's helpful here is perspective taking. If your friend was in your shoes, how would you see it then? And if your friend could see you, well, how would they see? What would they say about your situation? So you just start to broaden it out, but ultimately you need to have experiences in different relationships because those experiences are what shape the way you see yourself. And I think that's really, it's so key. There was really interesting research looking at attachment patterns in childhood and adulthood. The correlation is weak. So it just tells me the way you fundamentally see yourself is not set in stone. But to change it, you're going to need to have big, emotionally salient experiences.
And in order to do that, a lot of...
Push you in a new direction.
I didn't mean to interrupt. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, in order to do that, sometimes the beliefs we have, even though they might be maladaptive, even though we know there is evidence against them, they can be very hard to let go of. Sometimes it can be very hard to come out of what we would call our comfort zone. It just feels safe. Those new experiences, those things we do to challenge ourselves, we take small, little, measured steps at a time. For instance, we might practice even just in a cafe, in a restaurant, No, I don't take milk, or no, I don't take sugar, or, or sorry, that wasn't what I ordered. We take little small safe steps to assert ourselves, to have new experiences, to go and enroll on that course, to join the drama group, whatever it is. We do those little things in small, little, safe, measured ways. And what happens over a period of time by paying attention, the key thing is always paying attention. What you find is some people might say their comfort zone starts to widen. The way I like to phrase it is you start to become more courageous. You start to become confident. You start to get a stronger sense of yourself. It's not that we actually lose part of ourselves. If you want to lose that part of yourself, that's the way you want to phrase it. The way I would put it is we don't actually lose a part of ourselves, because the memories always are, because we know we're not going back there. I'm not that person anymore. But those other parts of us start to become more galvanized. They start to become stronger, more consolidated, because we're leaving behind the things that are actually keeping us back.
Yeah.
Unhelpful beliefs that drag us back. You're never going to amount to anything. If you do that, you're just being selfish. When we start to leave those things, as I say, we start to get a better sense of ourselves. And I really do like that term. I said that one time just in a session with a client, and it was almost like fireworks went off. Talk about a light bulb moment. And I thought, that's really good. I'm going to keep that. I'm going to keep on saying that. Yeah, we become more courageous. I think that is a wonderful word. Yeah. Courageous, that means so many things.
Yeah. And it takes time. You can't expect it to shift overnight.
Yeah. Small measured steps.
Yeah.
You were talking about swimming earlier in the shallow end. You say if you're afraid of the water, do not jump into the middle of the Atlantic just to prove yourself wrong. You're not helping yourself. That's not going to do anybody any good. Small, little measured steps. And you pay attention each and every time.
Yeah. I love watching. My kid does gymnastics.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things they've started doing in their, obviously it's their marketing on their social media pages, they've been coaching these kids for years. And they show their first cartwheel, and then they show them 3, 4, 5 years later. And you think, that is years of intentional practice. Apply that in your relationship, and you'll be doing somersaults. Metaphorically. I'm not promising that anyone can learn to do a somersault.
Somersaults at my age?
Not going to try that. Bit of wisdom from Cluster B Milkshake. When I feel rejected, I will abandon the relationship and then blame them for the downfall, because it can't be my fault. It's got to be theirs. I've been doing some pretty good self-reflection. I've been doing pretty good at self-reflecting, but sometimes it's too late. Yep, it's progress.
It can be too late, but the fact that you're doing it at all.
Exactly. That's the thing about the direction of travel. Mm-hmm. Maybe the cartwheel's a little less shaky, but you're not quite at the somersault yet. But I think the other thing, of course, is that, sometimes it is too late. Sometimes the other person doesn't want to restore the relationship, and that's their choice. That's fine. That doesn't mean you're a terrible monster.
We do learn. We learn from what works, but we also have to learn from what doesn't work. Mm-hmm. We build on what does work, and we start ruling out what doesn't work. So even if a relationship isn't recoverable, we figure out what our part in it was that made it go bad or wrong. And we commit not to do that in the next one.
Absolutely. And also, I will say, partner selection is really important.
Yeah.
You've got to choose a partner who hopefully will not bring those things out in you. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that means the one you don't feel intense chemistry with at the beginning. Mm-hmm. That's a whole other issue. But I'm really aware of the time. So I'm scrolling. Oh my God, there's loads.
This is the latest I've ever been. You're keeping me up way past my bedtime.
Do you want to take a couple more questions?
We'll We'll take a couple more questions.
A lot of them are comments, so I'm going to skip the comments because it's late. For those of you who are not in the UK, it is now 10:20 for me and Darren, so it is bedtime.
Past my cool.
Yeah, there you go. People with MPD is either toxic or abusive. Yeah, listen, people with MPD by definition have problems in their interpersonal relationship, but you also have some capacity to do something different, and it sounds like you're starting to do it. But
the capacity to try something different is very important. So
yeah. So if you were in a physically or verbally abusive relationship and you've taken on verbally abusive traits in a new relationship, how do you go about reprogramming without therapy? Is this normal?
Is it normal?
It's understandable.
It's understandable. When I hear questions like normal, what immediately comes up for me is, well, could you define for me normal? And then I'll tell you whether or not it's normal. I think, yeah, Ruthann, I'd say you're right. I think it's understandable. I think when you talk, and I'd be curious, the abusive traits, would you say those abusive traits are, and only you can answer this, you're not doctor, are you? Are those abusive traits, are you being defensive? Do you feel as if you're being attacked? Are you reacting in a way that maybe that person reacted with you when even you might have just what time it is or something? Whatever it was, whatever they were doing with you, do you find yourself, if you're being defensive, yeah, there could be something going on there, something you might need to look at. If you're, I'm not suggesting you're doing this, but what I would say is, if you're doing it because you're getting the kick out of it and you're enjoying it, maybe there is something maybe serious going on you really need to look at. But it could well be you're being defensive, and it's maybe it's how it's coming out.
Most of the time, I think that is defensive. It's like, I'm so fearful that I'm going to get attacked again that I overreact to any and all conflict. And I think the first thing to recognize is the new partner is not the old partner.
Yeah.
And you've got to slow yourself down before you react. And you've got to be saying to yourself, this is not my old partner. Maybe I want to act differently.
Concept, I think a few live sessions ago, I talked about the concept of updating your memory.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it feels as if we get triggered in a certain way, and all that trigger is an emotional memory. We remember how something felt. And when we remember how something felt, it's almost like yesterday's threat is present today. Yesterday's situation is present today. I'm right back there. We find ourselves acting the way we did. When we're updating our memory, there's different ways we can do this, but whenever we're updating our memory, we could be looking at where we are now, who we are now, who we're with now, different environment, different people around, so it might look different, our hair might be different, there could be a lot of different things going on. We're updating our memory in different ways. Those triggers and so on, because the person may react, behave in a certain way that does remind us. So the trigger doesn't necessarily go away, but instead of us leaping straight into survival mode, heading straight to 100, we might go to a 10 or a 20. And that's only there. All it is a reminder. We're not necessarily reacting. Something else I was going to say, but I've lost my train of thought, so I'll let you take over.
I would also say, if you've got a good partner who's supportive, you can, a really good way to put the pause in and update your memory is to be like, I am feeling threatened, and I know it is not to do with you. It's an old pattern, and so I want to take a break. I want to step outside of this for a moment to gather myself. So you don't have to, beat yourself up for becoming verbally abusive. But at the same time, you do need to be like, okay, I don't want to continue. I'm going to ruin this relationship that might be a good one. So slow it down. And I think get that little bit of distance is a really good place to start. And if the partner's supportive, then start saying it out loud. I'm having a memory again. And I know it isn't you.
And as you were saying earlier on, Ruth, about, whenever we try, different behaviors, things like the self-care, that it comes after we start to do it. You start to reprogram, remember, you start behaving differently.
Yeah.
You start to respond, if you will, rather than react. You maybe do some of those interventions. You do those little things to try and update your memory, and then, if you will, the reprogramming starts to come afterwards, because you're starting to maybe a little bit more.
It will, because if you become verbally abusive in a conflict, the other person will almost always respond either in kind or they will withdraw. So it doesn't create a good dynamic in the new relationship. Whereas if you're able to respond with, hang on, this is bringing up memories for me. It's nothing to do with you. Give me some space. Let's come back to this when I've got my head together. Maybe the partner is quite warm and supportive about that and helps you do that. But if you do that, then you start to have new experiences of resolving conflict in a healthy way. And you can be far more relaxed.
Yeah.
And
you shift that win-lose again, from that win-lose to win-win.
Yeah.
It becomes a completely different conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we should wrap up because it's nearly 10:30. And as you can hear, I've got a cold, so I'm coughing and probably driving everybody crazy.
And I think poor Freud's probably walking about saying, why is he not down to let me out yet? I'm usually out this time of night.
Yeah. So, but yeah, it's lovely to see everybody.
Yeah, it was really nice. Thank everybody for your questions. I hope we could answer them to your satisfaction. And I really enjoyed doing this, and it'd be nice to do this again sometime.
We should. Thank you for doing it. It's been fun.
Yeah, it has
been really, really nice. So people on my channel who have not met Darren, go and check out his channel. And also, I am going to go live again, assuming I stop coughing. I'm going to go live again on Sunday evening at 9 p.m. UK time. So that's about an hour and a half earlier than now, if you're in a different time zone.
Are you taking questions on your live stream?
Yeah.
Then I will come along and think of the most difficult questions I can think of.
Great. That's nice. Thank you for your support for my channel. Now we have no contact.
That's my narcissism coming out. Okay, listen, thanks again. I really appreciate this evening. I really enjoyed it.
No, me too. Go check out Darren's channel. And goodbye.
Bye.